She dropped Ava on purpose. She's dangerous, Lydia hissed across the dining table, loud enough for the baby monitor and the neighbors to hear. I didn't blink. What she didn't know was that I had already signed my will the day before. So I took a sip of water, steadied my voice, and said gently, "Well, sweetheart, I trust Ava will decide for herself, someday. I'm Margaret, and I've spent 67 years learning when to speak and when to let silence do the talking. This isn't a story about revenge. Not really. It's about what you leave behind when your name gets erased. From birthday cakes, from family portraits, from the lips of the child you once rocked to sleep. Follow my story to the end, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. Let's see how far a grandmother's voice can still travel." It began on a Tuesday. The dinner invite came via email. Not a call, not a knock on the door, just a line of text from Nathan. "Dinner Friday, 700. Lydia made a roast. Dress appropriate. Ava's on schedule. Appropriate." That was Lydia's word. Her version of kindness always felt like the surface of a frozen pond. Glossy, beautiful, one step from a cold drowning. Still, I brushed off my navy blouse, the one with the tiny ink stain near the hem. The one John always said made me look like a teacher from a French film. I wore it anyway. For Ava, the roast was dry, the room colder than the February wind outside. Ava squealed when she saw me, reached for me with both arms. Her soft head burrowed under my chin. For 5 seconds, I was someone again. Not chaos, not a burden.
"Just Grandma?" Then it happened.
I leaned to pass her the rattle. She twisted, just a little, off balance. Nathan caught her barely. She didn't even cry. But Lydia gasped like she'd witnessed murder. Snatched Ava from my arms. "You could have dropped her." "Are you even steady anymore?" The fork slipped from my hand, clinked against the plate. Silence. Nathan didn't defend me, didn't say a word, just stared at the linen napkin on his lap like it was a legal document. I stood slowly, back straight, voice low. "I think I'll head home." And no one said goodbye. Even Ava had been taken into the next room. As I stepped out into the snow, I felt something catch under my boot. I bent down. It was a small, pink mitten. I picked it up, held it in both hands like it might vanish if I wasn't careful. That night, I made tea. Lavender, always lavender. The apartment creaked with quiet. I stared at the blank canvas in my studio. Ava's portrait half sketched, eyes still waiting to be filled. I added one brushstroke, then stopped. Something inside me shifted. Not anger, not grief, something quieter, sharpened by time, tied to love. I took out a fresh notebook, wrote the first letter. "To my granddaughter. Even if you never read these, even if they burn them, you'll know I was here." That was the beginning of the legacy they didn't plan for, of a quiet revenge they'd never see coming. And all it took was being erased. Would you disappear quietly? Or leave a mark they can't wash off? Let me show you what I chose. There was a time when Nathan called me his favorite teacher. Not because I taught him in school, though I did unofficially. I was his everything back then. Mother, father, lunch packer, bedtime singer, science fair sidekick. John died when Nathan was 6. A cold morning in November, heart attack sudden. He left with the leaves still on the lawn, never finished raking. I remember Nathan's silence at the funeral. He clutched my glove the whole time, tight like it was the last real thing left. That night, he cried into my cardigan. "I don't want Daddy to miss Christmas." "He won't," I whispered. "We'll hang his ornament like always." We did. Every year, even when Nathan was too cool for ornaments, he never let me skip that one. I got a second job after the funeral, typing reports for a dentist's office 3 towns over. I'd wake at 5, pack his lunch, and catch the 6:10 bus through icy dark. My hands would crack from cold before I even touched a keyboard. We barely made rent, but I made sure Nathan never saw the bills, just the blueberry pancakes on Saturdays, the ones he said smelled like cartoons. He used to draw on everything. Paper, napkins, his backpack, and I kept every one, even the stick figure of Super Mom, flying over a mountain of dirty dishes. He won the school spelling bee in 5th grade. Didn't want me to come. Said I'd embarrass him, but I went anyway. Stood at the back in my old beige coat and scuffed shoes. He saw me, grimaced, then won the whole thing with the word indispensable. I'll never forget what he mumbled after. "You can come to the next one. Just don't wear that coat." I didn't cry. I laughed. And the next week, I used a birthday check from my sister to buy a navy coat with brass buttons. Nathan said I looked like Mary Poppins. I wore it for every school event after that. It's the same one I wore to Lydia's dinner. She called it quaint. I guess the past doesn't age well in their version of the present. Nathan got into design school on a partial scholarship. The rest we patched together, the grants, loans, and my careful savings. Even then, he needed help with his final semester. So I did what mothers do. I sold the house, the one my father built in 1953. Oak floors he polished himself, a garden with peonies that bloomed like clockwork every May. I stood in the empty hallway before closing day, ran my hand along the door frame where I'd marked Nathan's height every birthday. There were 12 notches, one for each year I'd spent thinking that house would one day be his. Nathan never asked me to sell, but when I offered, he cried, "I'll pay you back, Mom," he said. "You'll always have a room in my life." I believed him. Of course I did. He moved to Boston after graduation, opened a small interior studio with 2 friends. They made chic spaces out of old factories, hung Edison bulbs from ceilings and called it modern luxury. I visited once a month, brought muffins, watched him sketch things that looked like art to me. That's when I met Lydia. She walked like someone who expected the world to shift for her. And it did. She smiled, but never with her eyes. Nathan changed after that, not all at once. Like winter creeping over the last warm day, he started answering texts with K, stopped letting me visit the studio. The muffins were too sweet for Lydia's plan. And then one day, he said it. "Mom, maybe it's time you go downsized a little. Simplify things." That was the first crack. Hairline. Nothing broke yet, but I felt the chill through it. Still, I painted Ava's nursery myself when Lydia was pregnant. Pale lilac walls. Tiny golden stars on the ceiling, only visible when the lamp was off. Nathan said, "She'll love it, Mom. She'll always know her grandma was here." But paint fades, and so do promises. The gallery smelled like citrus and glass cleaner, white walls, even whiter faces, all angular dresses, quiet shoes, curated lauder. I came with a pie, wrapped in gingham, still warm. The woman at the door looked at me like I'd brought a goat. She asked for my name. Not because she didn't know it, but because she needed to place me. You're Nathan's mother? Not Margaret. Not guest, just the old root holding up the tree. I nodded, smiled through it, and stepped inside. The photos were enormous. Lydia glowing in designer linen. Ava all cheeks and curls, giggling in soft light. There were frames on every wall. Gallery-style shots, brunches, baby milestones, brunch again. But in all that polished perfection, but not a trace of me, not even in the background. I stared at one photo for too long. Ava's birthday. I recognized the frosting. I'd made that cake. There was the high chair, the tiny pink crown, Lydia's manicured hand holding the candle, but the arm on the left, mine, was cropped out clean. I took a step back, then another. "Isn't it lovely?" Lydia appeared beside me, smelling of rose oil and performance. I managed. The photos are very professional. We wanted to keep it cohesive. You know, visual narrative, clean lines, minimal clutter. She said it like I was dust on her brand. My hands were still holding the pie. It had cooled by now. Nathan walked up, holding a drink he wasn't sipping. "Hey, Mom." His eyes flicked from me to Lydia and back again. "She did a great job, huh?" I searched his face. For a flicker of apology, of conflict, of memory, nothing. I set the pie on a side table. No one touched it. A woman passed me and whispered, "Is that her mother-in-law?" Like I was a footnote. A rumor. I stood in front of one last photo. Ava was laughing in Lydia's lap. Blurry motion. Pure joy. But the background window reflected someone holding a rattle. Fuzzy off-center. Face turned. It was me. The only proof I'd ever been there was by accident. I moved slowly. I passed the canapes I wasn't offered, the smiles that slid past me like fog. Another wall. Another curated family moment. Ava at the beach. Ava asleep in her crib. Ava covered in icing. I made that blanket. I painted that crib. I baked that cake. But you wouldn't know. Because in every photo, the world was perfectly framed to exclude me. Nathan and Lydia smiling at each other, like I'd never existed. I paused at a set of black and whites. Motherhood in natural light. There she was, Lydia, backlit, haloed, holding Ava like the Madonna. The caption beneath read, "Faye Grace begins with simplicity." I felt something twist, low, deliberate, not rage, not sadness. Something like shame in a new coat. I turned. No one was watching. No one ever was. Until I stopped in front of the largest print, Ava's first birthday. Her eyes lit with glee, frosting on her nose. The crown tilted, gold letters on the wall behind. There should have been 3 adults in that photo. I remember it clearly. I stood behind Ava, held the camera, laughed when she grabbed the candle. But in this version, the camera floated. The moment was ghost-held. It was the lie that broke me, not the exclusion. The rewrite, the idea that they could rearrange history to suit Lydia's palate, to flatten me into negative space. My hand moved before I even knew. 2 fingers slipped under the frame's edge, one pull clean. The gallery assistant gasped. A tiny, startled sound. The print curled like paper ash. Tore down the center. Ava's smile split in half. I held the torn halves in both hands, not trembling, not ashamed. Then I placed them carefully on the white floor. Someone muttered, "Oh my God," but no one came near. I looked up. Nathan stood across the room, staring, mouth slightly open, no words, and Lydia. Lydia smirked, took a sip of her sparkling water, whispered to the woman beside her. The woman nodded. They both glanced at me like I was a cracked mirror. Maybe I was. But even a cracked mirror still reflects the truth. The gallery door shut behind me with the quiet of judgment. The street outside was colder than I remembered. Boston wind had a way of slipping past any coat, even one with brass buttons. I made it halfway down the block before I heard the footsteps. Mom, wait. Nathan? His breath came in puffs. He wasn't used to chasing anyone. I didn't stop walking. "Please," he said, "just wait a second," and I turned. His cheeks were flushed, hair a little messy, still boyish despite the suit. "I didn't know you were going to do that," he said. "I didn't either," I replied. We stood on the curb, snow grit under our shoes. Streetlights buzzing. "I get it, okay, you felt left out," he muttered. "But Lydia's image, it matters." I tilted my head. "That's what this is about. Her brand?" He looked away. "Mom, you've never really fit that world." He winced at his own words. "I mean, Lydia's audience expects a certain aesthetic." "I'm not an aesthetic, Nathan." "I know." He paused. "But you make things complicated." That stung more than I let on. As if love was supposed to be neat and brand safe. I took a step closer. "You think erasing me from a picture makes the picture easier?" He didn't answer. "I didn't come here to be worshipped," I said. "I came because Ava deserves to know where her eyes came from. Where her laugh comes from." He shifted on his feet. "Nobody's erasing you." I almost laughed. "Son, that gallery erased me frame by frame." His shoulders dropped. Not in shame, in exasperation. "I'll talk to Lydia," he said. "We'll figure something out." But his voice didn't carry the promise. Just the script of a man trained to manage optics. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the folded card Ava had once scribbled on. A wobbly sun, 2 stick figures holding hands. I held it up between us. "She made this for me last month." I tapped the little heart in the corner. She called me Guama, not a brand. Not clutter. Nathan looked at the drawing, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he stepped back. "Just try not to make a scene next time, okay?" I smiled. Not kind. Not bitter. Just tired. "There won't be a next time." I turned open the car door and got in. As I pulled away, I pressed the card flat in my lap and kept driving until the lights of the gallery were gone. The pie dish was still in the sink. Crumbs hardened. Cinnamon stale in the air. I didn't wash it. Not out of protest. Just didn't see the point. That night I sat at the dining table with a calculator, a yellow notepad, and a growing feeling I hadn't felt since John passed. Disbelief. I logged into my savings account. The numbers blinked. Something was wrong. Down 15,000.
Gone.
I checked the ledger. Transfer made 6 weeks ago. To cover business marketing expenses. A Nathan's name on the authorization. I stared at it, like it might rearrange itself into something less brutal. He used my name, my access, my trust. I reached for my paper folder. The one with the navy strip and my name printed in pen at the top. Inside were notes, small deposits from art sales, interest summaries, even birthday checks from my sister tucked in like bookmarks. Years of scraping, saving, stretching, all for them. I remembered the day he first asked, "Mom, it's just temporary. We've got a client lined up who wants 5 units furnished. It'll flip fast, I promise." I was slicing apples for pie. He dropped by unannounced. The only time Lydia wasn't with him. He looked tired, but hopeful. That same boyish optimism he wore in 5th grade when he ran home to tell me he'd spelled indispensable. Right? I gave him the check. Didn't ask for papers. Didn't even take a photo of it. Just said, "Make it count." Now, the account sat quiet, thinner. I opened the side drawer. Found the letter John had written the year before he died. His handwriting crooked at the end. "If you ever have to choose between being loved and being respected, choose neither. Demand both." I ran my fingers across the words. Closed the letter. Turned off the lamp. But I didn't sleep. I laid awake wondering if betrayal always wore this kind of quiet, not rage, not theft with a mask, just withdrawal, one slow deduction at a time. By morning, I knew what I needed. Not vengeance, not even confrontation, just clarity, and a copy of every account with my name on it. The bank lobby hadn't changed, same maroon chairs, same smell of printer paper and waiting. I sat with my purse on my lap, back straight like it was Sunday service. A familiar voice called my name. Margaret, come on in. Tea floors. She'd worked there longer than I'd been a widow. Same kind eyes, same tidy gray bun. I haven't seen you in months, she smiled. How's of? I nodded. Softly, growing fast. We sat across from each other. Her desk still had the little ceramic cactus I'd made her one Christmas. I opened my folder, laid it flat. I need copies of every account under my name, every withdrawal, every ownership change. All of it? Floors blinked, then typed, click-clack, pause, click. She squinted at the screen. Clicked again? There's something here, she mumbled. Her eyes scanned, then stopped. Her posture shifted. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew. Knew what? 3 of your long-term CDs and the joint trust account were switched to shared ownership with Nathan last August. The room fell quiet, but my ears rang. I don't remember signing anything. You signed a durable power of attorney form? She said gently. Backdated for tax season. Nathan brought it in. Said it was just to help organize filings. My mind reeled. August. That was when Ava was born. The same week Nathan came over, with Lydia waiting in the car. He'd handed me a folder, said it was standard. Just to make taxes easier? He was holding Ava. I remember that, because I signed it on the kitchen counter while she drooled on his shoulder. I'd been so focused on the baby's gurgle, I didn't read the second page. I thought it was just about his business, I whispered. Floors looked down. I'm truly sorry. Margaret? I stared at the screen, the blinking numbers. My name sitting next to his, not above, not in control, just adjacent, like I'd been slowly moved from matriarch to mom, from owner to co-signer, from center to margin. I pressed my hands together in my lap. They didn't shake. They simply folded. Can I get printed copies? I asked. Floors nodded. As she stood to fetch them, I noticed the cactus. Its paint had chipped. One arm broken clean off. I'd always thought it would last longer than me. Now I wasn't sure about anything. The mailbox became a ritual. Every Tuesday. After tea. Before the sun dipped too low, I'd walk the 5 houses down to the blue box on the corner, envelope in hand, heart folded inside. Tava. I always wrote with a sticker of a ladybug in the corner. Inside, a story, a sketch, sometimes a pressed leaf. Things I wished I could hand her in person. Things I hoped she'd understand someday. But they all came back, marked in red. Return to sender. Recipient unknown. Address blocked, like I was a scam, a glitch, an error in the system. I kept them all, stacked neatly in a shoebox. 73 letters in 6 months. Nathan didn't respond. Not to the calls, the emails. The voicemail I left on his birthday. I made your favorite, chicken pot pie. Just thinking of you? No answer. Lydia had blocked me, social media, phone, email, like I was toxic, radioactive. Even Susan, my old neighbor, stopped waving when I walked past. I think Lydia told people I was unstable. Or maybe Nathan did. Or maybe silence is louder than any rumor. I stopped painting. The easel gathered dust. The brushes stiffened in their jars. Only the pie dish remained in the sink, a quiet rebellion against being forgotten. Then one afternoon, I clicked a link by accident. A post on a baby product blog. Lydia, holding Ava in a sun hat, bragging about organic cotton. The comments gushed. Perfect, Mama! What a beautiful bond! Influencer goals! I scrolled, heart tight in my chest. Then it happened. The screen flickered, a live stream. They were filming from a picnic. Ava running on the grass, arms out like a bird. She tripped, laughed, got up again. The sound crackled, but I heard it, her laugh. Still the same. Still mine. She looked right at the camera, face smeared with strawberry. Held up a daisy. And in that second, I didn't see Lydia, I didn't see Nathan, just her. My girl. Ava, I reached toward the screen. My fingers brushed the glass, and I cried. Not the way people do at funerals, but the way you cry when something beautiful reminds you how much it hurts to be invisible to it. I hadn't stepped into the park in weeks. Maybe months. Too many strollers. Too many grandmothers with hands being held. But that morning, something pushed me. I took my old sketchbook, the one with paint smudges and taped corners, and walked 2 blocks to the bench near the duck pond. Same creaky boards. Same stubborn squirrel who always begged for almonds. I opened to a blank page. My hands hesitated, then moved. Soft pencil lines, Ava's curls, the way her nose crinkled when she laughed. I didn't need a photo. Every detail was stitched into me. Her first steps were on that grass just 2 years ago. Nathan had filmed it. I had cried. Lydia had reposted it with a sponsored caption. I shaded gently around Ava's cheeks, paused, looked up, and froze. A small girl in a yellow hoodie was toddling toward me, wild curls, tiny sneakers with rainbow laces. She stopped a foot away, stared at my hands, at the sketch.
Then at my face.
Her mouth opened. Guama, the word hit me like a hymn sung in the dark. I swallowed, put the sketchbook down slowly, opened my arms. She stepped in without hesitation. The warmth of her nearly undid me. I pressed my cheek to her hair. Still smelled like oatmeal and sun. Still mine. I missed you, I whispered. Quick footsteps. The nanny. Early 20s. Flushed face. Oh my God, Ava, she reached us. Ava didn't move. Come on, sweetheart. Time to go. The girl didn't budge. Just looked up at me again. Guama come. The nanny shifted. Her voice lowered. I'm sorry, Mrs. Duval. I didn't know she remembered. She just ran when she saw you, I nodded. Didn't blame her. The nanny knelt. Iva, let's go get your snack, okay? Ava looked at me, then at her, then reached up. The nanny lifted her, held her tight, but Ava's arms stretched back, the little fingers waving until they turned the corner. I sat back down. My lap empty, heart full and wrecked all at once. I looked at the drawing, smudged where her sleeve had brushed it. I didn't fix it. Didn't want to. That smudgy was proof of memory, of love, of the simple truth that no one could crop me out of. Not today. The rooftop shimmered in golden blush. Balloon arches. Cupcakes stacked in spirals. String lights wrapped around glass railings like vines of curated joy. Iva's first birthday was being streamed to 3 platforms, tagged with Ava Turnswan and a sponsorship for organic fruit pouches. Guests clinked glasses filled with rose. Music floated. Soft jazz is sterile and safe. Lydia floated too. Silk jumpsuit, polished smile. She moved from group to group like she was hosting a gala, not a child's milestone. Nathan stood near the gift table, adjusting the bow on a toy horse like it mattered. The cake was 3 tiers, dusty pink, topped with a gold one. Ava clapped as they wheeled it out. She didn't understand what a party meant, but she liked the sound of clapping. Behind her, Lydia's mother dabbed her eyes for the camera. She's so loved, she whispered. No one noticed what was missing. Not the lavender pie, not the navy coat with brass buttons, not the quiet woman who always hummed before lighting candles. No one said Margaret's name, not once. Her death had come 7 days earlier. A Thursday, cloudy, uneventful. Nathan was on deadline. Lydia didn't answer the phone. By the time they called back, the hospital had already listed her under unclaimed kin. Grant, the lawyer, had to step in. They didn't cancel the party. Didn't move the date. Didn't change the theme. She wouldn't have wanted us to, Lydia said. She'd want Ava celebrated. The servers passed around macarons. Someone asked about the new nursery wallpaper. Nathan smiled politely, but his hands kept fidgeting. Wrist to wrist, finger to palm. Something wasn't squealed again. The room turned to her. Lydia gestured for the phone. Let's go live! The screen went up. Hundreds of viewers joined. Hearts and comments poured in. Ava is a dream. Look at that setup. Pinterest goals. Where's Grandma? Lydia glanced at the screen, tapped the comment away. Let's focus on the moment, she whispered. The candles were lit. The music dipped. Ava blinked at the flame, then reached for it. Nathan leaned in to steady her hand, but before she could touch the wax, a voice interrupted. Firm, clear. Excuse me, folks. I have something to read on behalf of someone who couldn't be here today. All eyes turned. Grant stood near the arch of balloons, gray suit, leather folder in hand. He looked like he belonged at a courthouse, not a birthday party. Lydia stepped forward, confused. Can this wait? Grant's voice didn't rise, but it held the weight of stone. I was instructed by Margaret Duval to read this aloud on the occasion of her granddaughter's first birthday. A silence rippled outward. One of the waiters stopped mid-pour. Even the jazz track faded. Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. Ava reached for another strawberry. Grant unfolded the letter. The pages trembled slightly, or maybe it was his hand. He began, To my darling Ava Fuff, if you're hearing this, it means you're surrounded by balloons, frosting, and people who love you. I wish I could see you. Lydia shifted. Grant continued, I want you to grow up brave, kind, and curious. And I want you to know that even if the world edits people out, love doesn't disappear. People glanced at each other. The air thickened. That's why I've created something for you, a trust in your name. For your education, your art, your path. A murmur of approval stirred, until Grant added, "But there is one condition." Eyes narrowed, phone slowly lowered. "Each year until your 18th birthday, you must write one letter. Not an email, not a post. A real letter, by hand. To me, your grandmother. You won't need an address. Mr. Grant here will keep them safe. He will never read them. They're just for us." Lydia's mouth opened in protest. Nathan paled. Grant pressed on. "I've even 1 year is missed. The trust would dissolve. The money will go elsewhere. But the letters—" He paused. Swallowed. "The letters will still matter." So Grant closed the folder, folded his hands. Stepped back. No applause, no music, just the sound of a single balloon popping near the door. Someone whispered, "Is this legal?" Another? "Did she really do this?" Lydia turned to Nathan, voice sharp. "You knew about this?" He shook his head, eyes wide, mouth dry. The camera on the tripod kept filming. The livestream was still on. Hearts stopped flowing. Comments poured in instead. "Wow, she left a legacy." "All right. Respect. I'm crying. Justice. Too much?" The birthday room was full of people, but it had never felt so quiet. The music returned, but no one danced. Lydia cleared her throat, lifted a flute of rosé. "Tava," she said, voice brittle, "may every year be sweeter than the last." A few people clapped. Soft, obligatory. Nathan stepped away. Toward the terrace, phone in hand, though he didn't dial, just stared at the skyline. Inside, guests murmured. Not loud, but loud enough. "I didn't know her grandma passed." "Did you hear what the letter said?" She said a condition like a test. Ava played with a cupcake, oblivious. Sticky fingers, pink frosting on her chin. She turned suddenly toward the far wall. There used to be a framed photo there. Margaret, holding newborn Ava, smiling like the world still had time. Lydia had taken it down 2 weeks earlier. Said it didn't fit the color scheme. Now it was just white paint and the faint shadow where the frame had been. Ava pointed. "Wama." The word hung in the air. A woman near the buffet froze mid-bite. Another lowered her phone. Lydia's smile faltered. She knelt beside Ava, wiped frosting from her cheek. "No, honey. That's just a wall." But Ava kept pointing, not crying, just insisting. Grant slipped toward the elevator. He didn't take a macaron. Didn't say goodbye. As he exited, he glanced once over his shoulder. Saw Ava still staring at that wall, the ghost of a frame the adults tried to erase. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky, once golden, now streaked with gray. Back inside, the livestream continued. Hearts still blinked, but now mixed with angry faces, prayer hands, broken hearts. Comment after comment rolled in. "She left a condition?" "And would you do it?" "This feels cruel. This feels brilliant. Quiet justice. Forgiveness." "I'm watching from Denver. She reminds me of my mom." Iva placed her small hand on the white wall. Left a smudge of frosting right where Margaret's shoulder once had been. And in that moment, the absence was louder than the music. It was raining that morning, not a storm, and just the kind of soft drizzle that blurred the windows and slowed the world. Grant's office sat on the second floor, above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon. Margaret liked that. Said it made things feel less like legal business and more like memory. He poured tea without asking. She never took sugar. He always remembered. They sat across from each other as the rain tapped the glass. "I want to change the terms," Margaret said. Grant blinked. "Off the trust?" She nodded, unclasped her worn leather purse, and pulled out a folder, edges frayed. Inside, a single drawing, crayons. A stick figure with big curls, a smaller one with glasses. 2 hearts. 1 word, spelled Krut Guama. "She gave me this last week," Margaret whispered. "It's the last thing she handed me before. Well, before everything changed." Grant waited. Didn't interrupt. Margaret smoothed the drawing flat. "It made me realize, as she might remember. Even just a little. I don't want revenge," she continued. "I've outlived the taste for it. But memory." She looked up. "I'd give anything to still exist in hers." Grant leaned back. "Go on." "I want to create a condition," she said. "Something simple. Every year, until she turns 18, she must write me a letter. Just one, by hand. Put it in an envelope. You'll keep them." Grant considered this. "She won't have an address. She won't need one," Margaret said. "She just needs to know someone's still listening. And if she doesn't write, then the trust dissolves." Quietly, no drama, she sipped her tea, still warm. I know it's a strange request, she added. But the world they're raising her in, it edits things. It smooths out the past until people like me just vanish. She tapped the drawing. I want Ava to remember that I wasn't perfect, but I was present. Grant was silent for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer, took out a fresh form, and began. Grant slid the new form across the desk. Margaret picked up the pen, paused. Before I sign, she said softly, I want to be clear. This isn't a punishment. Grant raised an eyebrow. This condition. She continued. It's not meant to test her. It's meant to reach her. Even if I'm not here? She folded her hands. She's going to be told stories about me, Grant. Versions. Edited memories, filtered through silence or someone else's shame. But letters? Her eyes glinted. They'll be hers? Private? Sacred? Grant nodded. It's your legacy, Margaret. However you choose to shape it, she signed. The pen scraped slightly against the page. It felt heavier than it should have. Grant stamped the paper, dated it, then reached under the desk and pulled out a slim navy blue box. What's that? He smiled. My wife keeps pretty stationery she never uses. We can use this to store Ava's letters. Margaret traced the lid with her fingers, then reached back into her bag, pulled out an envelope. No stamp, just Ava, written in careful cursive. Inside a pressed leaf and a note written in fountain pen. Your laugh sounds like rain on the window. Stuff. I miss it more than anything. So she handed it to Grant. Would you mind keeping this as the first? Grant nodded. He placed it gently in the box, then closed the lid. Firm.
Final. Sacred.
Margaret exhaled slowly. Do you think she'll write? Grant looked up. I think if anyone ever felt truly loved by you, they'd never forget how. She didn't speak, just smiled and reached for her coat. Before leaving, she paused at the door. You know, she said, if she only writes one, and then forgets, I'd still be grateful. Grant didn't argue, didn't reassure. He just walked her to the hallway and waited until the elevator closed. Then he walked back to his desk, opened the navy box, and adjusted the envelope inside like it was a matchstick cathedral, a place where memory could begin. Outside Grant's office, the rain had stopped. The sidewalk still shimmered, reflecting headlights like candlelight on water. Margaret didn't go straight home. Her feet knew the detour before her mind caught up. The bakery downstairs still used the same bell above the door, a soft ding that sounded like December mornings. She stepped inside. The girl behind the counter was new, but smiled kindly. You're just in time. Last heart still warm. Margaret nodded. I'll take it. It was lemon. Tiny, topped with one raspberry and a little curl of white chocolate. She tucked it carefully into her purse beside the sketch pad. No reason, no plan. Just something soft. Back home. She didn't turn on the lights right away. The quiet felt sacred, earned, held. She lit the small lamp in the corner of her studio, uncapped her pencil. The page stared back, blank but willing. She began with a curve, the outline of Ava's cheek, just as it looked the first time she had laughed. Not a polite smile, a laugh. Messy, unexpected, full. Margaret had been holding her on her lap, reading a book about ducks. Ava had reached up, pressed a hand to Margaret's cheek, and giggled. The kind of giggle that shook from the belly like music made only for one person. She drew that hand now. 5 little fingers, too small for proportion. Didn't matter, she shaded gently. No rush, no need for perfection. This wasn't a portrait. It was a keepsake. A moment rescued from the blur. When it was done, she signed her initials in the corner. Not full name, just MD. Then she opened the navy box, placed the drawing inside, folded carefully next to the envelope Grant had kept. 2 pieces. A letter, a memory, a beginning. Her fingers lingered on the lid. Not trembling, just still. She closed it with both hands. Not with grief. Not yet. With purpose? The clock didn't tick anymore. It had stopped weeks ago. Margaret hadn't changed the battery. She liked the stillness. Time felt softer without it. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender. Not the artificial kind. The real stuff she kept hanging in a bunch above the kitchen sink. The wind outside hummed against the windows. Not urgent. Just there, like an old friend who didn't need to speak. She sat at her desk in the same cardigan John once called the cloud sweater. Faded blue. Elbows thinned from years of leaning. The cup of tea beside her had gone cold. She didn't mind. Her pen moved slowly across thick ivory paper. If you ever wonder who you came from, know this. You came from softness and steel. You were born of mistakes and love and second chances that looked like ordinary days. So Margaret paused, watched the ink settle. The way her letters curved like they were breathing. She didn't plan to send this one. Didn't fold it. Didn't seal it. It would stay right there, by the window beside the box. A breeze slipped through the frame. The curtain lifted, then settled. On the easel nearby, a canvas sat half finished. Brushes cleaned, but still damp. She'd started painting Ava again. This time older, with a daisy in her hair. Just the outline for now, but the hands were right. Margaret had always been good with hands. She set the pen down, touched the edge of the paper. No ceremony, no music, just the soft sigh of something closing. She stood, moved to the window. The city shimmered below, porch lights, TV flickers, late dinners being warmed again. Life carrying on the way it always does without asking. Margaret smiled. Not big, just enough. She walked slowly to the bed, sat, unfolded the blanket with the sun pattern Ava once laughed at. I looks like popcorn, she'd said. Margaret lay back, the lavender still drifted. The paper still sat open. The tea untouched, the canvas waiting. She didn't close her eyes. They remained fixed on the ceiling's shadow patterns, as if watching for something that was just beginning. The knock was gentle. Once, then twice. Mrs. Jeller, the neighbor from 2B, stood outside Margaret's door, holding a small container of soup. She hadn't planned to come. But something felt still. Too still. The third knock echoed longer than it should have. No answer. The superintendent opened the door with a soft click. Mrs. Jeller covered her mouth. Margaret lay in her bed, blanket pulled up to her chest, face turned slightly toward the window. The curtain moved in rhythm with the morning breeze. No struggle, no panic, just stillness. A nurse later called it peaceful. Said the heart had likely slowed without a fight. Grant got the call at 11:07 a.m. He arrived an hour later, coat still damp from the fog, eyes unreadable. The building manager met him at the door. Didn't leave much behind, he said, as if that explained something. Grant didn't respond. He stepped inside Laura and closed the door behind him. The scent of lavender still lingered. Faint but unmistakable, he moved through the space slowly. Carefully! The teacup was still on the desk. The letter lay beside it. He unfinished, but full. He read the first line. Didn't read further. Some words aren't meant for anyone but the one they're written to. He found the navy blue box on the bookshelf, tucked behind a row of paperbacks and a small photo frame facing inward. Inside 2 letters, a sketch, a sprig of pressed lavender now pale and flattened like a memory. He closed the lid, held it with both hands like something sacred. No fanfare, no documents to sign, just a quiet transaction between 2 people who understood what promises meant. He turned to leave, paused at the easel. The painting was unfinished, but the hands were done. Always the hands. He nodded once, then walked to the door. Keys clicked. Lights off. No need to disturb what had already been honored. As he locked the door, he looked down at the box. Small, unassuming, but weightier than most lives he'd ever settled. He didn't carry it like evidence. He carried it like a vow. And somewhere down the hall, a draft passed through and carried the faintest trace of lavender into the afternoon. The park hadn't changed. Same crooked bench. Same patch of grass where ducks never quite landed, just waddled in circles like old habits. Grant sat beneath the elm, the navy blue box beside him. The box had aged, corners softened. One tiny scratch across the lid from that one TSA check on his way back from Vermont. But it still held inside 3 letters, 1 sketch, and something that felt very much alive. Children giggled in the distance. A kite tangled in the branches overhead. He didn't look up. He was waiting, or maybe just remembering. Then he heard it. Then the unmistakable squeal of small feet in sneakers.
Ava, same curls, a little longer now? Same bounce, same spark?
She held a juice box with both hands and marched like it was a mission. The nanny followed behind, slightly breathless. Grant stood, smiled. They'd crossed paths before, brief nods, a wave at the corner, nothing formal. Just the passing recognition of shared guardianship. But this time Ava stopped. Her eyes landed on the box. She pointed. Mine. The nanny hesitated. You remember that'd. Walked closer. Grant knelt, opened the lid. Inside, everything was wrapped in tissue. He removed the letters. Careful. Then he reached into the inner flap by and pulled out a single sheet of thick ivory paper. Held it out. You want to draw something? Ava grinned. Dropped her juice. The nanny scrambled, but Grant just chuckled. From his coat pocket he produced a tiny crayon. Purple, the kind Margaret used to call hope in wax. Ava took it and, without waiting, sank cross-legged on the grass. She didn't ask for help. Didn't ask what to draw. She made a swirl, a big one. Then 3 short lines beneath it, then a circle that might have been a sun. Or a cookie. Then she signed it just a large A, with a second loop that trailed off the page. She stood, handed it back to Grant. "Letter," she said. The nanny blinked. "I didn't tell her anything." Grant smiled. "I know." He folded the drawing once, placed it between the older pages, closed the lid. His hands lingered on the top. It felt like Margaret was there, not in ghost, but in rhythm. The kind that moves through hands, ink, paper, and a little girl who didn't need instructions to remember love. Grant took the long way home. The box rested on his lap like it always did. Silent, present, unmistakably hers. He passed the corner bakery. Same brass bell. Same faint scent of sugar and yeast. They didn't know she was gone. Or maybe they did, but didn't ask. At the next intersection, his steps slowed. Margaret's old building stood quiet. Same ivy clinging to brick. Same third-floor window with the cracked screen she never bothered to fix. The name on the buzzer was different now. A young couple had moved in. He'd seen the stroller last month. He didn't press it. Just stood there. Let the wind move past him. Let the quiet wrap around his chest like a scarf made of years. Then he walked on. That night Grant sat at his desk, the lamp low, the navy box open. He turned on the screen. Searched for the video he'd once sworn never to watch again. There it was. Ava Turns 1 live replay. The thumbnail still had Lydia's frozen smile, rosé glass raised. Half a toast. He clicked play. The party unfolded like a movie he already knew the ending to. Then came Margaret's voice. "To my darling Iva." He let it wash over him. Didn't pause. Didn't look away. When it finished, he closed the tab. Reached for Ava's drawing. Ran a hand across the purple lines, still slightly waxy under the light. Then he unfolded the earlier note. The one Margaret never sent. "If you ever wonder who you came from, you came from softness and steel." He read it aloud to the room, to no one to her. Then folded them both together, placed them gently in the box, and closed the lid. This time, his hands stayed there just a little longer. He didn't speak, didn't narrate, just breathed. The room smelled faintly of old paper and something like lavender he couldn't explain. Before turning off the light, he slid a fresh page into the drawer. Not to write yet, but to be ready. Because someday Ava might ask, "Who was she, really?" And someone would have to answer. Maybe in stories. Maybe with one page. Folded once. Held forever. Ask, what would you write if you only had one page to be remembered? The apartment was quieter than usual. Not peaceful. Just restrained, like a conversation no one dared to finish. Ava was asleep early. Lydia paced the kitchen, glass in hand, phone on speaker. "She ambushed us, Nathan." On camera. "Do you understand how that plays online?" Nathan didn't answer. He sat at the edge of the sofa, hands clasped. She kept going. "I've been managing PR for days. I had to delete comments, mute half our audience." He stood, left the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Lydia didn't follow. In his study, the air smelled faintly of dust and cedar. The bookshelf still held photo frames turned backward. He hadn't faced them yet. A padded envelope lay on the desk. No return address, just "Fog to Nathan" from MD Estra, forwarded by Grant. He opened it. Inside a stack of copied letters dated over the past year. All addressed to Ava. None ever mailed. The handwriting was familiar. Loops that never wobbled. Ink that never ran. He read the first, "Sweetheart, today you grabbed my thumb and didn't let go. I hope one day you never let go of kindness either." He swallowed, flipped to the next. "I saw a butterfly today and thought of you. Still small, still bright, still free." The letters weren't sad. They were full. Of mornings and music. Of spilled tea and sidewalk chalk. They weren't meant to be statements. They were stitches. He pressed one to his chest, eyes closed. She had been writing even when he wasn't listening. Behind him, the door creaked. Tiny footsteps padded in. Bairnevan, Ava, stuffed animal in one hand. Hair matted from sleep. She didn't speak. Just climbed onto the couch beside him, placed her head on his thigh and breathed. Nathan ran a hand over her curls. Slower than memory, he looked down at the open letter. "Love doesn't need permission." Margaret had written. "Only presence." He folded it gently and let the room finally be quiet. Nathan hadn't opened the door to Margaret's old room since the week she died. Lydia had offered to clear it out. He told her to leave it. Now, months later, he stood in the doorway with no excuse left but silence. The room was exactly as she'd left it, slightly dusty. A mug with dried lavender still on the windowsill. The lamp, switched off. a faint trace of chamomile in the worn fabric of the chair. He stepped inside, each floorboard giving a soft complaint. The easel still stood in the corner, canvas half-painted, a child's outline, one arm reaching out toward something unseen. Nathan walked closer, a daisy, roughly sketched, uncolored, but unmistakable. The face wasn't finished. But the hand, it was Ava's. He could see it now. The same chubby fingers, the little scar on the thumb from that time she fell by the sandbox. The pencil lay on the tray below, still sharp, still smelling like new wood. He touched the corner of the canvas. Below it 2 letters. SEMD, Margaret Duval. His mother didn't sign things often. When she did, she meant it. The phone buzzed in his pocket. He let it ring once. Twice? Then answered hello? A pause. Not stiff? Just respectful. I sent something, Grant said. You should have it by now. Nathan looked toward the desk. The envelope was there. He hadn't opened it yet. I also wanted to ask, Grant continued, do you want Iva to write the first letter herself? Or should we wait? And Nathan didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on the small MD at the edge of the canvas. Grant didn't rush him. Eventually Nathan said, she's 2. I know, Grant replied, but sometimes presence matters more than penmanship. Nathan exhaled, long, quiet. I'll call you back, he said. He hung up, not rudely, just unfinished. He walked to the desk, opened the envelope. Inside a page of blank stationery and a crayon. Purple, the same kind his mother used to keep in the kitchen drawer, wrapped with a rubber band. He set the paper down. And for the first time in years, he let his fingers trace the edges, not of what was gone, but what might still begin. The light through the window was warm, gold-like softened honey. Nathan sat on the floor, legs folded, watching the page without touching it. The crayon lay nearby, purple waxy, waiting. A soft sound behind him, tiny feet. Ava! She peeked around the doorway, her curls messy from nap, thumb in her mouth. Then she spotted the paper. And the crayon. She toddled over. No words, just presence. Nathan didn't say a thing, didn't tell her what to do, didn't offer meaning. She dropped beside him, grabbed the crayon, and made a single swirl. Messy. Big. Like a storm or a hug, or a question mark that never needed an answer. Then she stood, wobbled a step, and placed her small hand on the canvas leaning by the wall. Her palm landed right on the initials. SEMD she didn't press, just held. Then, turned to Nathan with eyes clear and simple. Don't, she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. Later that evening, Grant's phone buzzed once, a text. From Nathan. She started, I know punctuation, no need. Grant leaned back in his chair, looked out at the quiet city skyline, and closed his eyes. The condition had never really been about rules. It was about rhythm. A small beat passed from hand to hand, from page to presence, and now it had begun. A month passed quietly, almost suspiciously so. Lydia took more freelance trips, stayed out later, avoided the room with the navy box. She never asked about the letters, never brought up Margaret's name. Nathan didn't press. Some distances don't need arguments, they unfold on their own. Ava woke earlier these days. No screens, just books, the cloth kind with flaps and farm animals. Nathan read to her at the breakfast table, sometimes twice, sometimes the same one over and over until the rhythm became comfort. They visited the park on Thursdays. Same bench, same breeze. Iva brought a crayon, always purple. Grant had started mailing them. Not letters, not yet, but drawings. Marks of presence, the kind Margaret would have framed. Grant didn't call often, but he sent small envelopes each labeled with a number. A C18, Sif 2Z18 Dyson sit inside a line from Margaret's original letters. A blank card, and a note in Grant's handwriting. What would she say to this today? Nathan kept each one. A drawer was filling in his study, the dust had thinned. The photo frames were still turned inward, but he dusted them now. He wasn't rushing, just preparing. At his office downtown, Grant opened a file. Label it as DUVL Liga ACY Tuaris.DNC FUE had organized everything. Ava's first crayon mark, Margaret's last unsent note, the video transcript. Even a scan of the tart recipe, Margaret scribbled in the margin of a letter about how love should be. Slightly sour and soft in the center. He didn't know what the file would become. A book, a trust exhibit, or nothing at all, but he kept it, not because of law. A beat with rhythm was continuing, not loud, not viral, but honest. One night, Nathan caught Ava pressing her palm to the window before bed. Who are you waving at, Bug? She pointed to the stars, one hand still against the glass. Let her go up? Nathan paused, then knelt beside her. Maybe, he said, or maybe it stays right here. He touched her chest. We're the best ones do. Iva nodded. Didn't ask more. Didn't need to. She was starting to understand what even the adults had missed. Some people don't disappear. They echo. Nathan waited until Ava had fallen asleep. The monitor hummed softly beside him. A blue light blinked like a heartbeat. He made tea. Didn't drink it. Just needed the warmth between his palms. The study felt different now. No longer a room of avoidance. It had rhythm. Even the silence had shape. He opened the drawer. Took out one of Grant's envelopes. See fake shik, but tonight? He didn't fill in Ava's drawing. He reached for a legal pad instead, the kind Margaret used to write substitute notes back in her teaching days. He wrote her name at the top, Ava Duval, then paused, pen hovering. What do you say to someone who will read it 10 years from now? Maybe 15. Maybe after you're gone? He began. You were small when I started learning from you. Not the kind of learning with lessons and grades. The kind that makes you remember what kindness looks like. He scratched out 2 lines. Start again. You used a purple crayon to answer a question I never asked out loud. Do you still draw? Do you still press your hand to windows when the sky looks like it's listening? The words weren't polished. He wasn't Margaret. His metaphors wobbled. But they were honest, and somehow he could hear her between the lines. Not correcting, just nodding. He signed his name. Didn't seal it. Folded once. Slipped it into the navy box between Margaret's last sketch and Ava's first swirl. 3 hands, 3 voices. Same page. He closed the lid. Not fast, not ceremonious. Just a quiet press. The kind that didn't click, but felt like something had locked into place. Outside, a wind stirred. Carried the faint smell of cut grass and ink. Nathan stood, walked to the doorway, looked back once. Then turned off the light. In the dark, the box remained. Not silent, just still. Like breath before the next word. The rain came soft that afternoon. Not stormy, just gray enough to keep everyone inside. Ava padded through the hallway barefoot, book under one arm, hair half tied, half wild. She had been looking for her dad's old sketchbook, the one with bird drawings and a weird unfinished platypus. Instead, she found the navy box, tucked behind a row of atlases no one had touched in years. She sat cross-legged on the rug, box in her lap, the way kids hold secrets they didn't know were waiting. No lock, no password, just a lid that opened like a breath. Inside layers. Drawings on construction paper, crayon curls, pressings of lavender, faded but still fragrant. She unfolded a letter. I saw a butterfly today and thought of you. The ink was smooth. Looped. Different from Dad's printing, another one. Your laugh sounds like rain on the window. She kept reading, pages with different voices, one soft and wise, one careful, a little clumsy. But both hers? She paused at a note with just one line. Love doesn't need permission. Only presence. Sava blinked, looked out the window. The rain hadn't let up, but it wasn't cold. She went to her desk, pulled a sheet of ivory paper from the bottom drawer, the kind they only used for special things. She sat, uncapped the fountain pen her father gave her last Christmas, stared at the blank space, waited, then rose. Dear Grandma, as I think I remember your laugh. She paused. No one had told her to do this. No assignment. No law, just a pull, like gravity but warmer. She kept writing. The pen paused after the last word. Iva reread the letter. Not to fix it, but to feel it. The ink bled slightly on the bottom edge, from where her hand had rested too long. She didn't mind. Smudges made it real. She folded the paper in thirds. Carefully, the way she'd seen her dad do with bills or holiday cards. No envelope. Just her fingers pressing the fold closed like a seal. She walked back to the navy box. Opened the lid. The scent inside had changed over the years, less lavender, more time. But the feeling, still intact. She placed her letter between her dad's first and her own drawing from when she was 2. The looped purple crayon still looked like motion. She lingered for a moment, ran her finger along the edges of old paper, pressed her palm flat against the topmost page, not to hold it down, but to let something through. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions. The room held its breath with her. She closed the box. Gently, no snap, no click. Just a sound like pages resting. She sat beside it, legs tucked under, back against the bookshelf. Outside, the rain had stopped. But the world hadn't rushed in. It gave her time. Ava didn't know if she'd write another letter tomorrow or next year. But she knew this. Legacy isn't written in stone. It's folded in paper, held in quiet, passed in hands, remembered in rhythm. As what would you write if you only had one page to be remembered?